Malaysia, we have introduced the ESG category for MSMEs. The award, you can get the information from our website. The closing date is 30th June. So if you feel you are one of the MSMEs that have done remarkable work in the ESG space, you can actually apply under this Enterprise 50 Award. This will be the 25th year we are organizing the award. And for businesses who are familiar with SME Corp Malaysia, we have a matching grant scheme called Business Accelerator Program. So this year, we expanded the matching grant to include ESG-related expenses, including purchase of machinery and equipment for energy efficiency, waste management, water management. If you want to change your product packaging to more environmentally friendly product packaging, we can actually cover under our grant schemes, and for carbon accounting as well as carbon footprint. So this is an expansion under our existing grant schemes. Just not quite, I think it's a bad news. When we opened our grant scheme in March, we had to close it within 3 weeks, oversubscribed. But this is for your early preparation, so you can apply next year when we reopen the scheme, so you can start preparing if you're embarking into the ESG journey. So there's some kind of financial assistance. In addition to the loan facilities, we also have open for grant facilities, so something that you can consider for your long-term plan. Okay, I'll stop here. Yes. Thank you so much. This is our website as well as our office. You can walk in. We have our SME hub at Platinum Central, Care Center Level 4. It's open every day, working hours. You can walk in. Or you can go to our website to get further information of the presentation as well as our financial assistance and other schemes. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Kausalya, for sharing some of the efforts that SME Corp are currently doing to support the SMEs in Malaysia. Next, friends and industry partners, we have come to the crux of our event for today's afternoon session. It's the workshop on advancing ESG adoption amongst Malaysia, and for that, I would like to invite our workshop facilitator, Margie Ong, the CEO of Thoughts in Gear. Ladies and gentlemen, Margie Ong.
Thanks, Fazrik. Good afternoon, everyone. Doing all right? Okay, excellent. So next up, we have you, it's 2:15 right now. I have you till 4:30, and we have to take a break. So we're going to take about a 10-minute break. Please be good about that, because we're condensing probably about 16 hours worth of material into the time that we have together. In order for us to be able to be quite specific and valuable with what we convey in that short period of time, we're going to throw forth a few questions, yeah? So just to understand who's in our crowd, and accordingly, both Tobias and myself, we will customize our messaging, and we will skip slides because we've got way too many slides prepared, according to who's in the audience. Having said that, both Toby and myself do not mind being interrupted. So please raise your hand if you have a question, because this is to make sure that we are moving towards action. Everything that you've heard here today is extremely relevant. You've heard about policy, you've heard about disclosure guide, you've heard how the government is helping SMEs. Now, how do you put that all together and make it work for your company? Yeah? And I'm conscious that it's not just companies here, so we will take a little poll. Before I do that, allow me to recognize the amazing team that has made this entire workshop happen. So we've got the CMM team, who you know has been the backbone behind really pushing a lot of the SME engagements. We've got myself, Thoughts in Gear, and the entire team, and Tobias and Lasaju in supporting this effort. So you've got a team of people behind this that are truly focused and passionate to make sure that we try our best to make Malaysia the most sustainable country when it comes to providing for the global supply chain. So if possible, what we're trying to really aspire towards is to make sure that when you see Malaysia, you see sustainability when it comes to our SMEs in global supply chains. Yeah, simple objective aspiration, very difficult to achieve, I'm sure, but it's going to take every single company in Malaysia in order to do that. So very quickly, ignore the time, because I think we're running a little bit over, but just look at the topics. So what we're going to do is, before break, let me give you an estimation so you kind of know where we're going to sit at. I'm going to ask Fazrik's permission to push break a little bit. Okay, so we're going to go from about 2:15 now to 3:30. Yeah, so I've got about an hour 15 to talk about the first half, which is an overview of sustainability, definitions, frameworks. It might, well, some of you might be way beyond in terms of knowledge. Some of you might just be starting out. We will try and cater to everyone. We will go into the depth that you want. So please raise your hand and ask questions, okay? 3:30, we'll take a 10-minute break. Come back 3:40 sharp. 3:40 to 4:30, we'll cover the SEDG in a lot more detail. Cool? All right. So let's jump in. One of the first things we're going to do, I'm going to step aside so you can actually scan. We're going to take 3 quick questions. If you can kindly pull out your phone, scan the QR code. We just want to know who's in the audience. And like I said, this is really important because we're going to really cater and customize the messaging. We can't say everything we want to say, unfortunately. So please let me know who you are. I'm not even going to begin to guess who others are, but, oh, there we go. Unlisted SME. Very few listed companies and large companies in the room. Okay, so unlisted SMEs and others. So excellent, because this means that we can really cater our message. And I'm sorry, but I'm really glad that the unlisted SMEs just kind of tipped off the top, because we're then going to cater our messaging to the most, the crux of the room, which are unlisted SMEs. Moving on to the next question, you now have an open text field. If you can type in your industry, we'll try and make our examples as relevant as possible as well. Manufacturing. Totally unnecessary piece of information. I'm from manufacturing too. So engineer by profession, worked in manufacturing, and then went into consulting. So hopefully we can address that. FinTech, fantastic. Oh, that's coming up big, FinTech. Fund management, venture capital, perfect. Financial institutions, consulting, VC. All right. So just to put it into context as the results are coming up, if you are in any way managing capital, if you're a private equity firm, if you're an investment firm, if you're a financial institution, if you can affect how money is moved in our country and outside of our country, please, the way you would pay attention to this presentation is that it would apply directly to your portfolio companies or your fund at large. So you would think of your organization in 3 levels, right? So your portfolio companies, at fund level, it would be a compilation of those portfolio companies in that particular fund, and at holdings level, right? So you would have 3 different levels of scrutiny, of measurements, etc. So the way today's presentation will relate to you is that we're talking mainly about your portfolio companies, all right? Excellent. Last question. And this is anonymous, so feel free to be relatively honest, because to be honest, we're going to dive into terminologies, and I might not need to cover some slides if you're a relatively experienced audience. So where is your company with regards to sustainability and ESG? You know concepts, but you don't know how they're relevant. You know they're relevant. Okay, I can't read it in order because it's flipping around, but it's really gauging your level of adoption in the room. Okay, trending right now is that you know it's relevant. So we probably don't need to cover many of the why slides, which is perfect. The second one, we're clear and all set on the adoption of sustainability in our company, and this is coming from unlisted SMEs, so I'm really, really proud of you guys. We have our strategy, but we're not sure how to implement and measure. Okay, so I'm going to focus the presentation a little bit around, you know they're relevant, you've not yet set strategy, goals, and targets. So maybe what we'll do today is we'll go really quickly on the why slides, yeah? Because And also a lot of the why has been covered a little bit earlier as well. So we're going to whiz through the why slides. We're going to focus on an adoption methodology, and we're going to touch a little bit on how it's relevant to every department in your company as well, because that will make it really, really actionable. All right? Okay, let's jump in. So we're going to jump into overview. I'm going to take a step back and really kind of set the stage for the room. So I think we've heard a lot of policy. We've heard a lot about the why, maybe from a, you'll get in trouble if you don't do this, which is true, extremely true, in a lot of aspects, and I'll show you 6 stakeholders who are looking for it. That is true. But one of the things, one of the messages that I want to set is truly why are we, or globally, embarking on sustainability in ESG? What is the urgency? What's the criticality? Why are we even talking about emissions? Is it just another trade barrier? Is it just another way of government taxing you? Why are we actually talking about ESG? Yeah? So one of the first there are 3 realizations I'm going to talk about. Very quickly, one of the first realizations that the world came to was that we truly cannot continue to sustain our current level and nature of human activity. The way we're consuming resources, the way we're extracting, the way we're consuming, it's really not sustainable. And there have been many, many different types of charts. This is the one I like because it really showcases that the future for anybody born in a variety of different years is very, very different. And in fact, for me, and maybe some in this room, I'm not even doing it for my generation, right? So 30 years down the road, I might still be relatively comfortable, a little bit hotter, but somewhat comfortable. But anybody beyond me, my children, my children's children, are not going to have the same experience of the planet as I am. So that's the first reason why we're here today. And I'm going to bring Toby. Let me just quickly introduce. Toby's the CEO of Lasaju. Every time you see him, he's going to be the environmental expert, a self-proclaimed tree hugger, and Toby's going to talk a little bit about this spiral.
Yeah. So just one quick minute to create a sense of urgency. I'm Mr. Doom and Gloom, right? I'm talking about the environment all the time. And oops, spiral has come up again. And we understand that environment is a more difficult topic for SMEs to think about, to start addressing. But we think it's probably also one of the most urgent ones. And the reason for that is that climate change is getting very serious. And is the spiral coming up again? Or? In any case, as most of you know, right, the atmospheric layer around our Earth is very thin, right? It's awesome. It lets as much energy in and as much energy out as we need to maintain a greenhouse gas effect that is actually needed for us to survive, right? What has happened over the last 150 years, we have pumped so many greenhouse gases to the atmosphere that we are upsetting this balance. Now too much energy stays in the world, stays on the globe. And this spiral shows if the green line is what would have been a normal temperature on a monthly basis around the globe, anywhere, right? How has this changed over the last 140 years? And you saw around the turn of the century, we had a time where it was actually a bit cooler on average, right? Happens sometimes. There's always some fluctuations in the weather and the climate. But then from the Second World War onwards, it became very, very, very clear. In around 1980s, that's when, or end 80s, when the United Nations formed the Climate Convention for Climate Change, because it was clear the climate is changing and it's getting warmer. Right? And it's getting warmer. Those numbers are not 2024 yet. The last numbers for the last 12 consecutive months is that on average, the temperature on Earth has gotten 1.5 degrees warmer than the pre-industrial age. And if you're like me from Germany, you would say, awesome, 1.5 degrees in summer, that just makes it nice, right? But it doesn't, because as Dr. Tatiana has mentioned earlier on, right, it doesn't mean everywhere it's on average 1.5 degrees warmer. It means in some cases it's much, much warmer. We have much more severe weather events, and they're much more frequent. And for all of you, you might remember, you have children. Last year, March, my children in Malaysia were not allowed to go to do sports activities. The temperature was so hot, combined with humidity, it's unhealthy for kids to be outside. If you're an SME in a construction business, that might mean next year, March, April, when the sun is at the highest point, your workers might not be able to work between 10:30 to 2, 3 p.m. because it's simply not doable. It's too hot. So just one slide to create a sense of urgency. We are at 1.5 degrees, and these 1.5 degrees will not go away, because unfortunately, these effects are permanent in our lifetime. We cannot reverse it in the next 1, 2, 3, 20, 30, 50 years. So we have to deal with it already, and we need to do everything that it doesn't climb further. So this is doom and gloom. I give back to Margie, and I'll come back afterwards for more on the environment.
Thank you very much, Toby. So you kind of get the feel now. So every time we go to him, it's going to be environmental, okay? But on that note, I just want to point to a source of data that would be really, really cool. And I only found out about it maybe about 3 weeks ago. And it was used really well by one of the large companies, construction companies in Malaysia. So IPCC has heat map projections, down to the state in Malaysia. And you're able to download that data and actually see how that's going to impact your SME. Like Toby said, if you're in construction, for example, or actually any form of activity that's exposed. Later on, I'm going to talk about forced labor as well. So there are guidances within forced labor that will not allow you to have your workers outside in those conditions as well. Yeah, cool. So quickly moving on. The second realization that the world had was that there is, in fact, extreme inequity and suffering in humankind. Now, that is because data was measured. Of course, social media played a big part in terms of the realization. And what did they realize? They realized that levels of poverty were, in fact, not trending down as fast as it needed to achieve the SDG goals. And if you haven't yet seen the term modern slavery, please be very, very shocked, because that's what it is today. Modern slavery encompasses forced labor, child labor, and also something we're not covering, which is, for example, child marriage, etc. But in the area of forced labor and child labor, of which many of you, especially unfortunately, Malaysia being under scrutiny at the moment, is very exposed to. As Navina mentioned earlier, there will be a guide that will be launched end of next month that details your forced labor requirements and the compliance required. Now, the thing about forced labor regulations is that for the environmental side, at the moment, for emissions, you are encouraged to reduce. For forced labor, it is truly a yes or no. It's non-negotiable. Your contracts will get cut, and later I'll give you examples of how it's actually happened in Malaysia. The third quick realization was that, in fact, globally, there is now increased demand for ethical and transparent organizations. Because at the moment, there's increased data, there's increased scrutiny on levels of corruption around the world. And as we know, levels of corruption are not equally distributed, and we are in a very high scrutiny area in terms of corruption. Now, these three just happen to coincide with what we're talking about today. So we're talking about E, S, and G, environmental considerations, social considerations, and governance considerations. The world has sat up and taken notice. So we've got, I'm just pointing out two here. We're going to talk a lot more about frameworks in a minute. So we've got the SDGs. Everyone's familiar with the 17 colorful goals. I would encourage you, if you are aligning your efforts to the SDG, which you should, because our government is as well, there are, in fact, 169 targets that are associated with the goals and 225 indicators that will truly help you map, beyond just the colorful boxes and a few words, how you're actually contributing towards the SDGs. And of course, you're familiar with the COPs, and however you feel about the COP meetings, it is truly one of the few times that multiple nations around the world come together and talk about the climate. All right, so jumping right into, we're going to start, okay, let me just put a little bit of context here. We're going to start with standards very quickly. I'm going to get a couple of things out of the way, because what I really want to focus on is talking about your business. How do you now apply this to your business? How do you adopt it? So let's get a couple of things out of the way. So standards, I typically differentiate the standards between reporting standards, which are usually non-profit organizations that are structured to guide you on how to report. You then have evaluation frameworks. And for many SMEs, this might not be pertinent, but the evaluation frameworks take the information that you have publicly available on your company and they will rate and rank your organization. Why is that important? Because many, many investors, some of whom are in the room, and financial institutions do rely on that data of that evaluation of your company to make very key decisions, financial decisions. In Malaysia, just highlighting 3 really quickly. So as you know, ISSB released IFRS S1 and S2, and many of us, that's a standard that many of us are hoping will be the harmonization of many different standards out there, all of those that are covered here. I don't have time to cover each one, but I will talk briefly on each. The SEDG, you've heard about this morning, and we're going to talk a little bit more about during the break. For SMEs, hopefully, it truly is simplified, and we'll look at how it is. And it's simplified, but it's not diluted. And we'll go a little bit into what that means a little bit later. And finally, in Malaysia, our stock exchange has subscribed with the London Stock Exchange to use FTSE for Good. So for the few people who selected listed companies, every single listed company on the main market is now being scrutinized for FTSE for Good. You will get your score. This is not an opt-in. This is based on publicly available information. All of main market last year. By the end of this year, all of the ACE market as well. All right? So, why do we, okay, I promised you I'd do really quick on why, so I am going to talk a little bit quicker right now. So there are 6 key stakeholders that we really want to highlight. And the reason we want to highlight these stakeholders is because we've seen them be very, very critical to businesses, especially SMEs, in global supply chains. And how are they critical? So the first one we're going to talk about are governments, right? So this chart very simply means that more and more, not only are net zero pledges being requested, kindly, friendly requests being made, but they are in fact being regulated. In addition, and we don't have time to dive into carbon pricing and carbon tax, which, as you know, Malaysia does not yet have a scheme, but it is hopefully coming up. But there are 27 different countries that have some form of an ETS implemented at the moment, and that's an emissions trading scheme. In simple language, that simply means, remember how you've been asked by many different parties to calculate your carbon footprint? And hopefully by the end of this session, you'll understand what that means, how you calculate it, okay? So that's coming up. But when you calculate your carbon footprint or your total GHG emissions, now we're saying that, in fact, that has a financial implication. So every ton emitted is now equal to a dollar amount. And how is that implemented? It's implemented when the product, for example, crosses borders. That border authority might be charging you on the amount of carbon that your product emits. Within countries, there might be taxes that are associated with the amount of carbon that your entire company is emitting. Yeah, so there are very real financial implications of what has been so far called non-financial disclosures. Yeah? All right. So Malaysia has its commitments, and we know that. So 45% reduction by 2030 and carbon neutral by 2050. Our regulators have been leading, well, this is, again, full disclosure, and this is purely from our perspective. So this is not documented or justified by data in any way, but in our review of multiple regulators in the region, we do feel that some of the regulations taken in Malaysia have been, in fact, quite progressive, and we're quite supportive of it. So first and foremost, there are multiple guidances, and I'm not going to go into each of them, but, and also because of the shortened period, do take this as your opportunity to afterwards Google, yeah? So I'm just going to show a couple of things. You can go off and Google some of these things. So Securities Commission have a variety of different guidances, all the way from what responsible investment is, how to categorize it, how to disclose on it, and I've included Islamic finance in here because in a separate topic that we don't have time to talk about, the overlap between Islamic finance and sustainability is extremely significant and not to be overlooked. Bank Negara has, this is our central bank, has multiple different guidances, of which at the moment CCPT is under a lot, it's been highlighted because that's the taxonomy. Okay, I'm going to talk in between, I'm going to try, and even though I know it's quite a sophisticated audience from the poll, I'm going to try and explain some of the terminologies as well. So in simple terms, a taxonomy is almost like a dictionary, right? So for your activities, there is a way of classifying how green is green, how brown is brown, where does your activity sit. That cataloging is being done by financial institutions, and that will determine, again, amongst other things, the flow of finance to your company. Yeah, so in Malaysia, we have two taxonomies. Central Bank has the CCPT, and Securities Commission has the SRI taxonomy. Globally, we have the EU taxonomy, we have the ASEAN taxonomy, so do select which taxonomy you want to align yourself to. For the listed companies, I won't talk long because there were not many. I hope you're well aware that you have amended listing requirements, and I'm going to step out of the way, I see the cameras coming up. All right, so the amended listing requirements has been amended to have 11 common sustainability matters and 22 indicators, of which 9 of those are mandatory. Please do pay attention to them, and the FTSE for Good evaluation that I mentioned earlier. Okay, I am truly speeding through all this, so I do apologize, but I want to make sure we convey as much as we can. Financial institutions, banks have, all you need to take away from this slide is that banks have signed up to say, I'm going to offer finance based on sustainability and ESG regulations or parameters. All right, so that can come usually in two ways. One is very packaged products, for example, a solar financing package, an EV financing package. The second one, which I encourage every SME in the room to talk to your financier, is that because we deal a lot with banks as well, and many, many banks have not published their sustainability-linked financing facilities. And so those instruments, they say, is on a case-by-case basis. So if you're willing and able to declare your ESG data to your banker, they might be able to give you a few basis points off. So do have that conversation with them. And if you initiate that, they are actually waiting for companies to come and initiate that conversation with them. All right. The takeaway from this slide is that your investors and the investors in the room are also looking very, very closely on ESG parameters in terms of, again, the movement of money. Right? There is a signatory program globally. At the moment, there are 17 Malaysian signatories to the UNPRI, and all that means simply is that they are now governed by a set of requirements for them to report, which will eventually trickle down to you if you are one of the investee companies. All right, this is the biggest lever of all the 6 that I'm talking about, which are customers. All right? So there is a report, if you're interested, it's called Carbon Dated by Standard Chartered. A lot of our ministries paid a lot of attention to this as well. So it says that 78% of MNCs are planning to cut suppliers by 2025 if they do not meet their ESG requirements, of which Malaysia is the 7th largest country in terms of export revenue at risk that might be affected by this decision. What that means is that our export revenue, of which maybe about 13% are SMEs, will in fact be switched to a maybe more sustainable supplier or country. Now I'll give you a little example. Some of you might know this example because it's been portrayed in the press as well. So beyond the big names that we've heard, so we know of, for example, the glove companies and the palm oil companies that have faced forced labor issues and restrictions and carbon border bans for forced labor. Now, there is, for example, a small company in Johor, and we happen to speak to somebody who knows them, and that small company's biggest customer was Dyson. And Dyson made up 80% of their revenue. As of March of this year, Dyson canceled the entire contract with a 6-month runway. And they switched to a more sustainable supplier because they were given, the company was given 3 different rounds of warning in terms of forced labor violations, and they were not able to rectify. And so as a result, they've lost 80% of the revenue. That is huge for an SME. So I'm also here to tell you that, regardless of the regulations that we've heard, the policies that we've heard, if we're talking about the stick in ESG, there are many other stakeholders that are also in the game other than our regulators, yeah? Of course, later I'm going to talk a little bit about the carrot, which is how are you going to identify the opportunities that exist within your business? So next, talent. I'm not sure this is as prevalent in Malaysia, but very much talent is beginning to select their companies based on the company's adoption of sustainability within their purpose. Consumers, we might not have seen as much of a consumer shift in this region or this country as we would have liked yet, but globally it does show that all things being equal, consumers are becoming a little bit more discretionary in terms of their purchases. All right, so that's all the why, and I tried to talk through that as fast as I can. Now, let's talk about your business. Now, one of the biggest, just now in the poll, one of your biggest issues was ESG is relevant, you don't know how to implement it within your strategy, goals, and targets. So what I can say is, ideally, there are 3 levers I'm going to introduce here. Look at your company with these 3 lenses, and it will hopefully flush out all the opportunities and risks that you have within your company. So we're going to talk about 3 levers on a range of threats all the way to opportunities. I'm going to start at the threats. You've heard a lot about this afternoon already. In terms of threats, we're talking about the ability to reduce risk, right? So what are the risks in your business? We heard about flooding, we heard about the heat, which are only, I'm going to talk about each of them individually, which are only 2 small areas of risk, right? But how do you reduce risk? How do you increase profits? Is that even practical? Is that realistic? Can you actually increase profits by adopting sustainability and ESG? And what are the growth opportunities, and how do you unlock them? How do you unlock growth opportunities in your company? Now, the reason I'm very excited about the 3rd business lever is because we're in a room of SMEs. And I can tell you right now that when I talk to listed companies, yeah, I'm very encouraging, but a little bit less excited, because you are extremely agile. You are able to pivot your business model much faster to meet any gaps that you see in this coming transition economy. I'm going to talk a little bit more about each of them quite quickly as well. But what we'd like to prescribe is that companies should, in fact, be looking at looming risks. You've heard about physical risks. Existential risk is very indicated by industry. So it's very much industry focused in terms of whether or not that industry is going to face an existential crisis. So for example, this is a very common, maybe not as direct, but as an example, ICE vehicles moving to EVs, does that mean that that industry is now becoming redundant, and how are they transforming themselves? That transformation is a transitional risk. How are businesses now facing that transitional risk in order to transition their business? Regulatory risks. So we've spoken a lot about regulation, and finally reputational risk. I'm standing here quoting some of the companies just now in terms of what they faced, because it's all over the press. Almost all the companies in Malaysia know their names and know who in fact has faced many issues in the different areas. Yeah. So in terms of reducing risk, the ability to stay in business and the ability to remain competitive. Now, increasing profits, when we talk about increasing profits, it is generally most likely within the realm of efficiencies. Yeah, so if efficiencies in energy use, water use, natural resource use, yeah, so every time you become a little bit more efficient, there is a cost reduction. And if any of you are having problems getting buy-in from board and management, which is very common, you're not alone, oftentimes when you come up with business initiatives or business cases that sit in this business lever, it's an easier way to get your first foot in the door in terms of getting sustainability initiatives through the door. It could be as simple as a production process that reduces the use of energy and water. It could be a little bit more ingrained. For example, there's a company called WCT. They pave and repair many of our roads in Malaysia. So what they did is they worked 4 years with Monash University, and they reinvented a process that was so accepted for decades. So usually when they repave roads, what they do is they have a vehicle that runs along the old road and pulls up about 5 centimeters of tar from the old road in order to smoothen it out. They will then collect that waste and cart that waste away. Then they'll bring in the new tar and they'll re-tar the road, right? So now what they've developed is this new technology, which has been widely adopted beyond WCT now, where there's a second vehicle that goes behind the first vehicle, and as the first vehicle picks up the 5 centimeters of road, the second vehicle picks up the waste, mixes it in with the new tar, the raw materials, and they use that to repave the road. So now, of course, that's much more environmentally friendly, but on top of that, they've now reduced their raw material use, and they've reduced their cost of waste management for that particular site as well. So many of these instances, we've seen so many good business examples, and I'm sure some of you might even have some yourselves. In one of the workshops, one of the participants raised their hands and said, all they did was when they're baking their tiles that they made, they shifted the orientation from vertical tiles to horizontal tiles and increased their oven productivity by 15%. And of course, that is in manufacturing, lean manufacturing, just-in-time manufacturing has been around for decades. So sustainability in many instances is nothing new. It's something you're already doing in your company. Ideally, if you can enhance some of those efforts, there is a way of increasing profits. I've spoken about the cost of capital in terms of banking, financial rates, being more attractive to investors, et cetera, et cetera. Unlocking growth opportunities. It's very much around the ability to differentiate and the ability to innovate. So how do you differentiate? So one of the things that we saw just now is that MNCs are willing to spend, well, I didn't pull out this specific stat, but in that same report, you'll see that MNCs have stated that they're willing to spend a little bit of a premium on products that are slightly more sustainable. So in terms of differentiating a traditional product, for example, I don't have time to go into case studies today, but for example, there's a company called Carbon Cure in Europe, and what they've done is they now have a way of producing green cement. Now, green cement itself is remarkable, but what they've managed to create are green cement blocks that actually absorb carbon from the air. And so therein lies a product differentiation. In terms of innovation, there are many, many ways to innovate the way your business can fulfill a need. I'll give you maybe 2 very quick examples. So there is a company in Malaysia that makes building sealant. So very small company, SME, right? And now they have transformed their raw materials and their processes, business processes, to produce green sealant. And they're the first that I've seen that have advertised on billboards on the way to KLIA that says, we produce green sealant. So every green building out there, and there are quite a few of them at the moment, I can imagine would be quite interested in their product. Another very quick example is a company called Next Green that have in fact repurposed their empty fruit bunches from the palm oil plantation. So instead of that being waste, they're now repurposing that into what they call non-pulp paper. And originally it was just a waste management initiative. It's now becoming a revenue-generating business unit that secured venture funding end of last year. So just some very quick examples that in fact sustainability and ESG can be a business differentiator and hopefully a lever of growth. Sit back, have a look at your company in terms of which of these 3 levers make the most sense. Of course, I would most probably encourage you to start at reducing risk, look at your win-win situations, your increasing profits, and then finally, strategically, get to a point where you're looking at your entire business model as well. Yeah? If you have any questions, remember, you do have to raise your hand, otherwise I'm gonna just locomotive through this, yeah? I'm not sure we have time for the examples, and these are relatively high level, feel-good examples, and I'll just play them at the moment. So one of the things that I like to quote from Warren Buffett is he says that when people tell me they've learned from experience, I tell them the trick is to learn from other people's experience. So here are some other people's experiences. So IKEA, I'm just gonna have them speak.
We make sure that where the product comes from, that we're able to understand what impact that has. If you buy an IKEA light now, we don't have plastic cords anymore on any of it. We only use cord, we don't use PVC in any of our products. It's actually a more expensive way to produce the product. So then we have to find other ways to save money through the rest of the design procedure. But it's the right thing to do. We buy wind farms now, we have solar panels, we try to look for renewable resources, we're using products that are recycled. Whilst, yes, we use a lot of natural resources, we are a business, we are here to make money, but we actually try to do that in a really responsible way. Doesn't mean we're perfect all the time, but I think that we make it's in the fabric of everything that we do. We won't be here in 50 years as a business if we don't look after forests, if we don't find sustainable sources. We are trying on every level to be more sustainable, to leave less of a footprint everywhere, and that feels something to be really proud of, I think. If you're a leader in another organisation that doesn't have sustainability on their agenda, be a bold leader. Yeah. Make a stand. Get it on your agenda.
I realize that's a large company and we're talking SMEs, but it's the message behind it, and I will have a little bit of an SME example later. Another relatively large company that started off as an SME, you might be familiar with the Chobani yogurt that you see in our grocery aisles. And here's the CEO.
Every single one of us have a responsibility making the world a better place, especially when it comes to business. We are facing one of the most tragic human crises in the humankind's history when it comes to refugee crisis. We have 65 million people around the world fleeing from danger, terrorism, hunger, and trying to save their life. They leave everything they have in behind and they go to a new place, and often in a very bad circumstances. I think business has a huge responsibility to play, whether employment, technology to connect them to employment, or integration in the community where they are, or bringing help, food, safety, education to the places where they are right now. There's so many places that we can help. We employ refugees that settled in communities, and we make them part of the community and help them to build their own life, at the same time trying to reach out to other side of the world and trying to make it a better life for them. I truly believe that you start from where you are, right from the community where you started with.
There were hugs aplenty this morning at the Chobani yogurt plant in upstate New York.
We used to work together. Now we are partners.
Ulakaya is giving his employees a 10% stake in the company.
And I have to care people who works at the company. I have to make it better for them. And I think that is the first step that you do. And then you widen, your horizon. It's not just a check the box or look good. It is something that you really care, not only yourself, but the whole company does. And having that in the center of the company and truly believe in it, not only good for the community and the world and humanity, but it's also good for the business.
All right, so some inspiring words said much better than I could have. So really, in terms of finding business cases that work for you, this might not necessarily be directly applicable to you, but go back when you're looking at your own business strategy. Just have sustainability as a lens. It's a lens within your business development towards growth in your business. And as the founder of Patagonia likes to say, profit happens when you do everything else right. All right, we're going to jump into definitions and framework. I have about 35 minutes to do this before I release you for break. So we're going to also whiz through this. Before that, any questions so far? So that's all we're going to cover in terms of the why and also in terms of the strategic business levers in terms of how you can go back today and start thinking about your business in a more strategic manner. Yes, do turn off your lights. Yes, do look at purely at efficiency, but also take a step back, especially if you're leaders in the organization. Do take a step back and think, how can I more holistically apply a sustainability lens by reducing risk, increasing profits, and unlocking growth opportunities? So very, very quickly, going back to basics, when we talk about sustainability, I typically try not to use the terms interchangeably. When we talk about sustainability, we're talking about economic, environmental, social, and governance as well. And oftentimes, this economic pillar is very well defined as our financial disclosures, and that is already well standardized and documented. And ESG is oftentimes referred to as our non-financial considerations, although as demonstrated, there are very real financial implications of these non-financial considerations. All right, I think we covered this, so I think I might have repeated that, no worries. I'm gonna, for the sake of time, I'm gonna skip through the standards. You can go back and Google them. So I was gonna talk about SDGs, I was gonna talk about ISB, ISSB, IFRS, S1 and S2. I was going to talk about FTSE for Good and the makeup of it. And we will talk about the SEDG after the break. Okay, so those were very quickly the standards. Now, the how. So if you're a small company and we've spent the last 45 minutes inspiring you and you are now inspired to take the next step and you say, okay, I'm ready, I'm keen to go, what do I do? All right, so we've got 8 simple steps here that I hope will help you along the journey. Wherever you are, if you're a fresh adopter, if you've done this for 2 years, if you've done this for 10 years, somewhere in this methodology, there is something that can support where you are on your journey. I will talk through each of them, but basically the methodology is as simple as know, plan, do, and tell. Know what we're talking about in sustainability and ESG within the organization, plan for it, do it, most important phase, and finally, tell about it, all right? So very quickly, covering the know. So we're talking about levels of awareness in the organization. Who needs to know what? Not everyone needs to know everything, is the takeaway message, right? So who needs to know what within the organization and when? So develop a capacity building program in your company according to their roles and responsibilities, the leveling in the organization, and the timing as well. Set up. In set up your governance structure. Who's actually going to monitor and govern all these different things that we're talking about, right? Have a baseline. So besides your GHG emissions baseline, have an ESG baseline as well. Where does your organization stand in terms of all the other sustainability initiatives? In planning, we've spoken a little bit about strategy. That's just one of the different methods that you can use. There are many other methods of coming up or infusing sustainability within your business strategy. Actions. So in determining your strategy, there are some actions. For example, I'm going to talk a little bit more about materiality assessment. I'm going to talk about 2 terminologies after I get through this, this methodology, and that's materiality and disclosures. And this is where, later on when I talk about it, this is where materiality sits when you're planning. After you know and you've planned, in the implementation, it's very much about diligent identification of metrics, measurements, tracking, progress tracking. All of this that I just said in the last 10 seconds is nothing new to you. It is basic good project management. So there are many, many fundamental components in adopting sustainability in business. That's nothing new. A lot of what you do in your company is so relevant. You just need to place a sustainability lens over much of what you do. So here, identify the metrics, track, implementation, dashboards, management reviews on a monthly basis, quarterly basis. Would you ever wait till the end of the year in November, December to look at your financials and discover whether you made money or not? You wouldn't, right? So why would you do the same for your non-financial disclosures? Why would you wait till the end of the year to see if your emissions levels have gone down, whether you've saved energy, whether you've saved on materials, etc.? Plan, what I would encourage is really track it alongside your financials. Have your non-financial components being tracked alongside that as well. And finally, and one of the most important factors is really to be able to report in a balanced and transparent manner. So put your data out there. Even though you're an SME, you have no requirements. And I always like to use a different term. I say you don't have to produce a sustainability report. Produce a sustainability booklet, right? Have 5 pages of data and narrative that just says what you did, how it went, and what you're planning to do. And have the data to support that. That could be your first publication in sustainability ever, and it can be 5 pages. But that is now your first foray into disclosing a little bit. And now you can use that with all the stakeholders that I mentioned earlier. So yes, they will come to you and say, fill up my template. And I know there are SMEs in the room that have shared with me that they have 8 different customers and they have 8 different types of formats to fill up in terms of ESG, and they spend 2 weeks on average on each reporting for each customer. So hopefully if you get your data in order on the back end, you can then very quickly transpose that into the silly different formats that all the different customers want. Yeah? All right, so getting into the 2, so this is just the overall methodology that I was talking about. That is a very long, we can go into a lot of depth because there are a lot of tools that we have behind that as well, but we don't have time for that. I think that's going to be my motto today. We don't have time for that. So, a very quick case study. So Desso was a carpet. Desso is being used by many of the business schools as a case study for sustainability. It was a small carpet factory that was going to go out of business, and a new CEO came on board. And the new CEO said, I have nothing to lose. He attended a conference like this. Many of us attend conferences and, nothing changes. He attended a conference and heard about circularity. And he said, you know what? This cradle-to-cradle concept of circularity might in fact transform my company, and I can save money and I'll be able to actually provide that for my customers as a market differentiator. And this is a little bit of what they went through.
Millions of square meters of worn-out carpet are thrown away every year, often being dumped at landfill sites. Early 2008, Desso, a leading manufacturer of high-quality carpet tiles and broadloom, took revolutionary steps to ensure that carpets can be safely recycled. Inspired by nature's continuous cycle, Desso bears the true identity of the cradle-to-cradle philosophy. Desso offers clients a take-back program to ensure that products will be recycled according to the cradle-to-cradle principles. Products will be taken back by Desso after their useful life and will be safely recycled into new carpet products or used in other recycling initiatives. Besides its own products, Desso also encourages international collection of all types of used carpet, except for carpet containing PVC. These carpet products are recycled using Desso's innovative separation technique called Refinity. This makes it possible to separate the carpet fibers from the backing, producing 2 material streams which can each be recycled. The carpet fibers are returned to the yarn manufacturer for production of new yarn. For polyamide 6 yarn, this process takes place at Aquafil, one of Desso's yarn suppliers. Aquafil has developed a proprietary technology at its regeneration plant to turn recovered post-consumer polyamide 6 carpet fibers into polyamide 6 again and again. And today's bitumen backing is used in the road and roofing industry. Fractions from felt-backed tiles are currently being used as secondary fuel, for instance, in the cement industry. Cradle-to-cradle design is inspired by nature and sees carpet as being made up of nutrients that should consistently remain in use in an unending cycle.
So some of you, especially those who are business owners in the audience, might already begin to see some of the ways that they have actually implemented it. So first of all, in terms of the cost savings across the entire value chain. Secondly, for example, how important suppliers are in that whole process. So it would not have been possible without the cooperation of their suppliers, for example. Many different messages that can be picked out from what Desso has gone through. So if you have time to read up a little bit more about their case study, they're extremely successful today. All right, very, very quickly, and we don't have time to go into each of the departments, although if you have a question, please raise your hand, because we can talk about each of them if you want to. Every department in your organization is critical to the progression of sustainability. And I've only listed 8 here, but there are many, many more. And the reason I want to talk about this is because we're getting a lot of feedback of how sustainability teams in large companies are extremely silo. Sustainability, half a person in an SME, is also extremely siloed. This needs to be a whole of organization approach where you have 8, for example, 8 different departments who are involved. So everyone from finance, strategy, risk and compliance, internal audit, as I read through, already begin imagining what their roles and responsibilities are regarding sustainability, the provision of data, the identification of initiatives, for example, human resources, operations, procurement, marketing, and comms. I'm just going to talk about 2 really quickly. I'm going to talk about internal audit, and I'm going to talk about procurement. So for internal audit, for example, are there any internal audit folks in the room? No, then I'm not going to cover this in a lot of detail, but the reason I'm covering it is because it is a listing requirement on Bursa as of end of last year as well. So again, I'm very fond of processes, and so first, plan your ESG audit, look at a process audit, audit the materiality assessment, the risk, the metrics, which is different from the data audit the data management process, but also audit the data itself. Now, that doesn't mean that internal audit has to become a sustainability expert overnight. It means that you have to ask the right questions. Internal auditors are already well versed on how to pick out loopholes in terms of whether it is data or reporting, apply that critical thinking to sustainability as well, and finally, prepare the report on the methodology of how you did that, the findings, and the recommendations, of course, with a continuous process and data improvement. And you can't afford to wait because it is at the moment being regulated, as mentioned. Very quickly, procurement. This is possibly the most important topic today facing your SME, because if you're here and if you're interested in the SEDG, you are probably part of a supply chain, either the supply chain of a large domestic player or a global player. Again, very process focused, a sustainable supply chain program. So I'm assuming that you want to set up a program to make your suppliers sustainable, and that's a large company. I'm assuming if you're an SME, you might be in the program of a large company. Yeah, so you kind of see which role you're playing there. So it is important for business continuity, to mitigate risk, and to optimize opportunities as well. So very quickly, steps. So very, very action-oriented. First and foremost, an anchor will design a supplier sustainability management program. Then they will engage with the suppliers. So the SMEs in the room, ideally, your large companies have already started thinking, your customers have started thinking what they're going to help you do, or what they're going to do with you, or some of the criteria that they're going to set for you in terms of sustainability and ESG. They will then engage you, and they will then profile you. In the profiling of suppliers, it's everything from who needs the most help to who is irreplaceable to who is willing, which will not only be judged by previous contracts but affect your future contract sizes as well. They will then hopefully progress to develop you. This could be capacity building, it could be access to financing. So there are many, many large companies, anchor companies, that have collaborations with banks, and they bring them in for vendor financing, some of which have a sustainability angle at the moment as well. And very importantly, monitoring evaluation. Your customer will monitor you, they will evaluate you, and that will have an impact on your future contracts as well. All right, that was my very quick spiel on internal audit and procurement. We could, if you are interested, we can, if you have questions, we can definitely detail some of this. I'm not going to cover this in a lot of detail, but just to highlight that materiality is probably the most important term that you need to know when you begin thinking about sustainability, because a very simplified, you'll know that we like to use very simple language, and what you need to take away from the side is that not all matters not all issues in sustainability are equally important to you. And two of you might be sitting next to each other right now, both from manufacturing, but each of those 15 topics that we talked about in SEDG will still be very differently important to you. Yeah? So materiality, again, I hope you walk away just knowing these terms, if not, just Google them. So a few terminologies. Material matters, you will hear that being used a lot, yeah? Material matters are ESG issues that are relevant and important to your business. The materiality assessment, so the word assessment already you know, it is a process to help you identify these issues. For large companies, there is a very structured materiality assessment process. And I'll talk briefly about it. But if you're an SME, at the moment, it could be as simple as your management team and your board sitting down, determining which of these are most important, use some industry materiality maps to help you, and then ask a few stakeholders. Ask your customers, what do you think is important to me? So just as simple as that, keep it simple. The large companies, it's a much more iterative process. And the matrix. A matrix is the result of the assessment. I'll show you one in a minute. Now, double materiality. And hopefully, if you understand this, you'll be a little bit ahead of even some of the other folks in the world that we've spoken to. So double materiality is actually a very simple concept. To implement it is very complicated. But double materiality simply means, okay, so far we've spoken a lot about how the environment, social considerations, and governance impact your company, right? How does it impact me? How are the floods going to impact me? How is the heat going to impact me? What are the regulations that I'm going to face? What are the risks that I'm going to face? Double materiality simply means that, yes, you do need to think about that, but you also very critically need to think about how do you impact the environment? How do you impact society? How are you being governed today? And what is that implication to the society around you? So truly think that's a very simplified understanding of double materiality, but I did want you to make sure that you put on both those levels of thinking when you're thinking through sustainability in your organization as well. All right, I'm not going to go through this for the purpose of time, but just so you know what a materiality matrix looks like. Usually large companies, you do have to do an internal assessment. This is board and management. This is external plus rest of staff. You have two coordinates, and you will map out priorities. That is a shameful way of explaining materiality matrix because it doesn't do it justice. It's a very important tool. I just don't have time to cover it right now. Some materiality matrices that you might see in the market, open any sustainability report, you will see a materiality matrix. Why? Because it will tell you, it's not for show and tell, yeah? It is to tell you what issues to work on. So please do Google how to run a materiality assessment, and it will show you how the important matters will surface, all right? Now, we're going to go into a little bit of definition. We're just going to cover two topics. I'm going to bring Toby back here in a minute because we saw the word environmental. And this one I'm going by the SEDG as well. So the non-financial disclosures. Remember where disclosures sat? In know, plan, do, and tell. Where did it sit? In the do, right? So once you've known and you've planned and you want to do, it's partly plan, partly do. You need to know how to measure, and what to report. So very clearly, and that's, when earlier Navina was presenting as well, the SEDG is not there to teach you how to adopt sustainability. That's what we just went through with the methodology. The SEDG, the Simplified ESG Disclosure Guide, is there to show you what metrics to disclose once you are on the adoption journey. All right? So, 15 topics. I'm not going to go through each of them. I'm going to hand over to Toby right now to cover emissions. All right? So let's quickly cover that.
Should we do it after the break?
We're going to break at 3:30, so we've got about 15 minutes. Is that sufficient?
Are you still able to tahan? Boleh? Well, that laugh was not reassuring. Okay. Okay. I'll try. Okay.
Or
And
maybe
maybe
let's make this a little bit more democratic. Who wants a break now? Who wants to cover one more topic before break? All yours.
that's a slim majority, but you need to vote, right? That's a lesson. You need to vote, otherwise the slim majority wins. Okay, so let's try to make it as interactive as possible, because it's not that difficult, right? I'm a SME kid. I grew up on a shop floor. My mother was running a small steel company with 20 employees. I was able to explain it to her over a cup of coffee. She got it. You must get it, okay? The point about greenhouse gas emissions is that it's often a bit confusing because people throw words at you. They say carbon, carbon footprint, greenhouse gas, GHG, and so on. It's not that difficult. There are 7 greenhouse gases. Those things up there, CO2, CH4, N2O, blah, 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 blah. All of them have an impact on our climate. The most common one is CO2, carbon dioxide. That's why we often say carbon. The others have a stronger impact. Anybody knows what CH4 is? Methane, right. Anybody knows what N2O is? Nitrous oxide, laughing gas, right? So some have a stronger impact. So we need to be aware there are multiple gases, and to make it comparable, we always translate it into CO2e, CO2e equivalent. Think about it like a currency exchange rate, right? If basically CO2 is 1, right, that's the Malaysian ringgit. CH4 is the Thai baht, 28, right? 1 ton of CH4 is as good as 28 tons of Malaysian ringgit. N2O, don't know which currency that is. HFC is like the Vietnamese dong, right? If you emit 1 ton of a certain hydrofluorocarbon, it might be worth 5, 6, 7, 12,000 tons of CO2. It's like an exchange rate. And we account for carbon with CO2e, CO2 equivalent. So far, all good? 95% of you can ignore nitrous oxide, PFCs, and so on. Just forget it. If you are in a very special sector like refrigeration, maybe you need it, right? Or if you have cooled supply chains, or if you are a producer of semiconductors, you need it. But for most of you, CO2 and methane is good enough. So now what you need, you know what you need to report and account for. How do we do it? And we think about it along your value chain, right? So if you are the reporting company, there are some emissions where you have direct control. You directly can decide what fuel do I burn or not, right? And that is typically the case if you have what we call stationary combustion, company facilities with stationary combustion. Anybody has a boiler in your company? Anybody here has a boiler? No, okay, forget it. If you have a boiler, you burn something in there, LPG, natural gas, whatever. Anybody of you has company vehicles, forklifts, trucks, cars? Yes, there. Do they run by themselves? What do you burn? Diesel, gasoline, do you pay for it or you steal it? You pay for it, right? So you buy a certain amount of diesel and gasoline to run your company vehicles. You have control over the emissions that you cause by burning it, okay? And that we call scope 1, direct emissions scope 1. Then the second one, and that is scope 2. Those are indirect emissions that we buy by buying a kilowatt hour of electricity from Tenaga, Sabah Electricity, or Sarawak Energy. Because for TNB, Tenaga, to be able to produce electricity, they burn coal or gas, or also, of course, they also use solar and hydro, right? But they have a mix of energy sources. So with every kilowatt hour that you buy, you also buy those emissions as scope 2 emissions. Do you know how many kilowatt hours your company buys? How do you know it? I guess you all try to pay the electricity bill. It's on there. It's as simple as that. The number is on there. That was the easy one, scope 1 and 2, but that's what most big companies ask you. Of course, there's something else. It's called scope 3, and that's a difficult one, but important, because those are the emissions that you buy by buying other products and services that you get from your upstream supply and from your downstream by selling your products to the market. And we'll cover them in a minute in a bit more detail. The reason why you need to understand it is because of this scope 3, because you provide a service or a good to a big company. That's why this big company is harassing you and ask you, hey, what's your scope 1 and 2? Can you tell me? right? Because for them, if you supply a service to them, you are their scope 3 emissions. So, but before we go there, quick recap. Scope 1 is I have stationary combustion. None of you has a boiler. Forget it for now. Scope 2, mobile combustion vehicles, transport, diesel, gasoline. And if you have a physical or chemical process, if you have a cement plant, if you have a petrochemical plant, you might have additional emissions from that process, but cement is very big. That's not an SME typically. Or you might have fugitive emissions. It means a leak, right? So there are a lot of SMEs that have cooled supply chains, cooled trucks, etc. So then you need to think a bit, do you have any leak of refrigerant? Super easy to know, because your guy who maintains the refrigerant, he comes with this green bottle, this 5 kilograms kind of bottles, right? That is basically the refrigerant that might leak. And because he charges you per kilogram, you know exactly how much it is. Scope 1. Scope 2, we said, it's mainly the electricity you buy. And you just need to be aware that a kilowatt hour from Tenaga has a different greenhouse gas intensity than a kilowatt hour from Sabah Electricity or Sarawak Energy, because they have different power plants. So you just need to be aware it's a different. Anybody here from Sabah or Sarawak? Nobody, okay. So Tenaga, for the sake of this workshop. And sometimes there are SMEs that buy cool air or heat, but it's rare. So now, if you understand scope 1 and 2 perfectly fine. Scope 3. And that is a long, long list. But the most important one here is probably purchase goods and services. That's why big companies ask you, what are your emissions? Because you are most likely purchase goods and services to them. Oh, maybe this one. Haha, yeah. Or you might buy a capital good, right? A truck is a capital good. Or you, there are upstream transportation and distribution emissions. The products, they don't come to your plant by themselves. It's an upstream transporter who sends it to you. And on the downstream side, right, again, to send my products to the market, there are trucks and vehicles that send it to the market. And there might be emissions from using the product, from the end-of-life treatment, etc. These scope 3 emissions are complicated. So in the first step, you don't need to worry about it. But you need to understand that's why the big companies are asking you, because they are trying to get their head around it, okay? And let's not go to the example. Let's take only this one. Anybody is a supplier to Gamuda? No? Okay, let's assume for a second, Gamuda has a lot of SMEs, okay? In the first year, Gamuda said, okay, we need to understand our scope 3, okay? And they took stock of what are the scope 3 construction emissions. Then they said, okay, we need to understand our supply chain, like Margie mentioned earlier on, right? They think, how can we engage our supply chain, our contractors? And then they said, this year, we are trying to quantify our emissions from purchase goods and services, from waste generated, from business travel, from employee commuting, from downstream transportation. That means, if you are now a small SME carrying the Roro bin with the construction waste from a Gamuda construction site to a landfill, they want to know from you, what are your emissions, okay? If you are supplying purchase goods and services, right, to Gamuda and you're a relevant contractor, they want to know from you, what are your emissions? That's why it's important, even for an SME, to start getting your head around it, because big companies will ask you. So far, so clear? So now to my mother, okay? My mother runs a small, or she's retired now, but she runs a small plant, not a packaging company, steel company, but basically if you're a small plant, you typically know, in this case a packaging company, what is the fuel that you use in your boiler, what is the fuel that you use in your vehicles, let's say company forklift, company car, company truck, and you know what is the electricity you buy. You have this file somewhere. I asked my mother, can you be able to get it for me? She says, yes. You know, accounting folder is there. It's 12 electricity bills, monthly electricity bills. It's the fuel bills with a fuel card, etc. It's easy to get. Similar for other companies, but let's not go there. The data is easy to get. Electricity bills, fuel bills. Once you have this data, all you need to do is, you take this activity data. Let's say I buy LPG, because I have a boiler now, okay? And on the fuel bills, it says, yeah, I bought 100 tons of LPG in 2023. Now I need to say, how much emissions does 1 ton of LPG emit? Is it difficult? Easy or difficult? Oh, no, very easy if you know where to dig, because it's chemistry. It's kind of God-given, right? There are standard default factors out there that tell you 1 ton of LPG equals 2.94 tons of CO2e, right? These default factors are published by the Greenhouse Gas Protocol, by many, they're available everywhere. We can give them to you if you want. So you only need to look at your invoice, 100 tons of LPG, multiply with this one, and you know your scope 1 emissions from your boiler. That's it, okay? Electricity, same thing. Scope 2 electricity, where do you get your activity data from, the kilowatt hours? The bill, the electricity bill. So you take 12 months Tenaga bills. Of course, if you have multiple sites, okay, you have 3 sites, and it's 3 times 12 months, so it's 36 Tenaga bills. You add them up. Let's say I bought 1,000 megawatt hours. So 1,000 megawatt hours is 1,000,000 kilowatt hours. I find the emission factor. This one is published by the Malaysian Energy Commission. They publish it for Peninsula, for Sabah and Sarawak. So I think that was now in 2021. I multiply my 1,000 megawatt hours with the emission factor, and I have my scope 2 emissions for electricity. And then one thing I might still need to do is to, add it up, divide it maybe by the tons of products, and I need to think about how to reduce them. And if you think now about your scope 1 emissions, if you have a boiler, so few of you had a boiler, but straightforward. If at the moment I burn a fossil fuel, all I need to do is all sounds simple, right? But I need to replace the fossil fuel with a biogenic, with a biological resource like wood chips, empty fruit bunches, or in palm oil mills, palm oil mill effluent. More important for you, if you have, for example, scope 1 transport emissions, if you have motorbikes or forklifts or trucks, you get the electrical version. And don't go out now and buy a 1 million ringgit long distance electric truck, right? That's not how you start SMSE. But you can start with a forklift, right? If you need to replace a forklift and you only use it in your compound, right? All the junkyards that I go to, all the basic bureau have a forklift. That guy never leaves the premise. They can charge it there anytime, right? They need to replace it at some point. You can replace it with an electric one. If you have motorbikes like Post Laju, right? A lot of them being replaced now with electric vehicles. So you can already take initiatives, actions to reduce your emissions, scope 1 and 2, with these simple steps. So you can easily account for them and you can easily reduce them. And for scope 2, there are multiple options. We heard it earlier on from SME Corp. You can use solar panels. You can use a green electricity tariff by Tenaga. And keep in mind, solar panels, they're still often from SMEs, this idea it's expensive. And they're expensive because you buy them at the beginning. It's a big capital investment at the beginning. And for 25 years, you don't need to pay electricity or less electricity. But you should know, solar is the cheapest source of energy right now. Without incentive, these panels pay back in 5 years and last for 25. With incentive, they pay back in 2.5 to 3 years and they last for 25 years. And every bank, nearly every bank, is willing to finance them right now. That is a very profitable way to reduce scope 2 emissions. So if you're an SME, you have a roof space, you can actually find a solution. So that was a quick 15 minutes introduction how to calculate and then reduce your greenhouse gas emissions.
Actually, I was just looking for one of your slides.
Okay, which one? Should we go back or what? Which one? Further back? More. Okay, sorry, too many animation. This one? Further back? Yeah, no, it's okay. Yeah? Yeah, so that was an example, right? That you say, if now Gamuda would ask you, right? They will also ask all their manufacturers, right? So of course, cement is easy, that's YTL or Hyo, but when they ask a brick manufacturer, that's an SME, right? So then, I don't know, what business are you in? Okay, fintech. Oh, okay, then you will be on the finance side, right? But this suddenly hits a lot of SMEs. All the transporters, upstream transport is SMEs, downstream transport is SMEs, waste management is SMEs, right? So a lot of them will be touched. Any more questions? Yes, sir.
Thank you. My name is John Lowe from Samantha. A quick question actually is related to Maggie just now. Because I have seen actually a lot of sustainability report only materialize or showing the impact on positive. Very little we saw the negative impact being shown. So I know we need to balance it up, but if we publish the negative impact, we will be penalized by financial institutes and our vendors, all those things? That's my question.
Thanks for the question. Excellent question, difficult answer. So, there are, okay, I'll draw the line between the data you have and the data you share, right? So those are two very different things. And the gentleman is helping us highlight a very important issue. So, the data you have should be as extensive as you possibly can internally. It doesn't mean that you have to disclose all of your data. In fact, most of the conversations we have with boards is where do they draw the line? How much of the data you have goes into the public domain to be disclosed data, which are disclosures, right? So a subset of the data that you have is actually disclosed. Now, the gentleman's question is, if nobody else is saying anything bad and I say something bad, am I going to be penalized? Now, you're not the only one asking it, because we had the very same question from a large bank. One of the 5 largest banks in Malaysia asked us because they had the lowest level of fines from the central bank in a reporting year. Now, nobody reports the fines that they got from central bank. And they cannot, because they do not have the official designation that they were the lowest fines, they could not declare that, but they wanted to showcase their fines. So they said, but if we publish our fines, even though it's the lowest, nobody else publishes their fines, we're going to look like the only banks that are being fined by the central bank. So to answer your question, it's a bit idealistic to actually expect the entire ecosystem to move along with you at the same speed in terms of data disclosure. What I would encourage is for every key quantitative data that you have, include the narrative, include the qualitative component. So for example, and in fact, to be honest, the ecosystem is becoming much more better educated. So the investors, the banks, they know when they pick up a report and you're disclosing your achievements alongside your challenges, but do also state how you mitigated those challenges. If you state your challenges, there is a lot of appreciation in the market. In fact, some of the frameworks actually look for those challenges and award points to that as well, just purely from a standards perspective. But on top of that, so if I could encourage, so remember the 5-page sustainability booklet I mentioned? So achievements, challenges, ways you're mitigating your challenges, and moving forward plans. So in your case, if you're disclosing your challenges, you are setting a very good basis to actually make the narrative for moving forward plans. This is how I'm planning to move forward. These are challenges I faced, and this is how I'm going to move forward to overcome those challenges. So I would still encourage you to disclose. I get the hesitation. And the market, unfortunately, is at a place where they're not really keen on disclosing. I mean, I'm very supportive of greenwashing litigation, but that's a little bit of the backlash from the greenwashing litigation, where there's a little bit of fear in the market about saying the wrong thing or publishing the wrong thing. Just be completely, ideally, as transparent as you can. If you made a mistake in the year before, which we have also encountered in our clients, straight away, as soon as you know, restate and give a very good narrative why you made that mistake the previous year. The market has a small window of tolerance at the moment where everybody's still learning, so do make that. But that's an excellent question. You see how questions can actually help inform all of us. So please ask more questions. Thank you very much. Back to you.
Well, okay, maybe leave the microphone here. Margie, don't run, don't run.
Is that a better one?
No, there's another question.
Hi, Tobias. My name is Jennifer, and I'm from the logistics industry. So what we have right now is a question on scope 3 calculations, because we deal with a lot of local truckers who do not track their emissions. And not just that, but logistics in Malaysia is a very established and very efficient way of doing things, whereby we do not use one truck to pick up one cargo from one customer. One truck can pick up cargo from multiple customers, and that becomes his overall mileage for the day. How do we then calculate our emissions based on the cargo that was picked up for us only?
Yeah, it's already a very advanced, a very good question, but also a very advanced question, right? Because rightly so, the moment you get into scope 3 and you work now with 100 SMEs, right? Individual truckers, some have a 2-ton box truck, some have a 5-ton box truck. So their emissions are different, and they don't only transport your product, right? So as a result, at the first step, you will need to work with default factors because you can't get the real data from them, right? You will probably say, okay, there are 5 different types of trucks that we use, right? From small box trucks all the way to big trailers, right? These trucks for the time have a different emission intensity, right? And you probably have to assume, right, what is then the load factor of these trucks and how does it translate into the emissions per ton of product or per ton kilometer of product, right? That would be the answer for now if you can't get this detailed information, right? But we are literally at the same time looking into transporters of large companies to check that now, right? We say, okay, let's take 4 of these transporters and check whether these default factors work out for different trucks, for different routes, right? Is that correct or not? And can we ask these contractors as SMEs, right, to simply calculate how many liters of diesel do you pump for this truck per month? How many kilometers do you drive per month? How many tons of our product and other people products do you transport? That's a long journey, right? So starting with these default factors, right, and then trying to get more precise. But then still the most important one is it's about not getting the precise number, it's about reducing it, right? And then asking this transporter, by the way, if your truck is now 15 years old, slowly falling apart, right? And we know that your delivery route is always greater KL area, right? Let's say it's a Massimo truck, always running the same route from the Massimo factory, bringing the bread to all the shops and going back. When you buy the next truck, can you make it an electric vehicle, right? Because it's running 250 kilometers, you could bring down the emissions. Sorry, long answer, but not forgetting the last part, right? Getting the number is 50% of the journey. Reducing it is the more important one. Any other questions? If not, we can also take all the questions in the break, right? We are there and we don't run away.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Toby. That was an excellent, very quick. I know, your time is very, very shortened. So okay, this is a little bit of an atypical workshop for us because we're trying to talk very fast, as you can see, and we are also not doing some of the interactive exercises that we could be doing. For example, identifying your areas of opportunities and areas of risk. Please go back and do that. Now, after the break, this is to entice you to come back, although you're going to get a very short break. After the break, let me just go through all the slides that I had planned before the break, but just to show you, we're not going to cover the topic of human rights and labor standards. The reason being that it's one of the most important topics you need to look at, but what I would say is wait till end of this month, actually, next week, and a child labor and forced labor guide that we had the privilege of helping write will be launched next week, and there will be very detailed guidelines, including more SEDG indicators specifically for this topic. So I'm not going to cover, what we were going to cover was definitions, we were going to cover some of the key frameworks, both internationally, like ILO and the Guiding Principles on Business and Human Rights, Malaysian laws and guidance, market standards like RBA, EcoVadis, etc. that you might have seen, and specific customer requirements. So all that is in the guide, so do look out for it. I'm not going to talk about the 11 ILO indicators of forced labor. Hopefully you already know it. These are the many global companies. This is available online. This is their supplier criteria, and it's very clear where forced labor sits, and it's very clear their tolerance, or rather non-tolerance, of violations as well. This is just a way of thinking through that ILO prescribes in terms of thinking through forced labor from the different stages of employment through to the different pillars from prevention, protection, and remedy of the situation. And I must say, I do want to highlight that remedy has a very real financial implication. We've seen in the news, I won't mention names, large companies in the market having anywhere from 60 million, 80 million in terms of remediation costs. This is paying back the workers what they are due because they were charged fees that they were not supposed to be charged. We just heard that there's a large company in Malaysia at the moment that is seeking financing for 200 million just for their anticipated remediation financial costs. So there is a very real financial implication of being in violation of forced labor practices. So on that note, we did get to break. All right, so here's what, so break is not free time, break is thinking time. So what I'd really like, if you can spend your break thinking through what we have covered in the first half, which is why I really want to cover a lot of the knowledge very quickly in the first half. Come back here. The first thing we're going to do is open for questions. So we're going to ask a few questions. Then we're going to talk in a bit more detail about the SEDG. Remember, that's disclosure, metrics, measurements. And we're going to do a little exercise where we're going to try and help companies identify the metrics so you can actually walk out of here with a sheet of paper that you can actually get started. And that is our ultimate outcome of this workshop, that you actually leave today at 4:30 with a thought of how to take the next step. Yeah? So if we can be very disciplined about coming back here in 10 minutes, it is now 3:40. I'm going to minus 1 minute. It's 3:40. We'll start again at 3:50 sharp. Again, we're going to spend 10 minutes on questions, so do think of questions during the break, and we'll see you after. Thank you so much. Hi, everyone. Welcome back. Sorry, there were some questions, so we kind of got a little bit delayed ourselves. Okay, so this is exactly why I want to put all the knowledge before the break, because I knew we would lose more than half, especially if you saw the skies. It's getting very, very rainy outside. Yeah, coming soon. So I'm for sure going to release you by 4:30, don't worry. So we just have half an hour to go. All right, so, but whoever is left behind, I think this is our opportunity to have a much more cozy conversation. And to be honest, I love it when there are very few people in the room, because then when you ask a question and we answer in detail, we don't feel so bad that we're keeping everyone else. But please, do ask questions. I will highlight 2 questions that were asked during the break that are extremely important, but are there any questions from the floor? That was your assignment.
Yeah, John again. The 2 questions that I think I also shared to you during the short break. One is how to set target. I mean, after we find the most significant, we have the threshold. So how are we going to set the target for improvement? First. Second, as SME, because I'm from Samantha, the Small and Medium Enterprise Association, the first question SME always asks, is there any incentive grant from government to subsidize our investment in sustainability report or journey? Because it's very difficult for SME to invest in it when they can't see the real ROI. So maybe, is there any guideline how much they should fork out for the reports? Thanks.
Thank you very much. So I'm collecting questions. That was targets, targets and cost and incentives. Any other questions? Okay, maybe what we can do, if we don't mind, since there are so few of us remaining, can the folks here come over here? Then I can talk to you we can have a much more intimate conversation. All right, thank you. Yes, and if you folks want to come over here, okay, then we're not looking all over the place. All right, can I also have a show of hands to see how many companies are there in the audience? Companies, large, small, doesn't matter. Okay, so mainly companies left behind. Okay, so we'll get very practical with our responses. So the 2 questions so far we have, how do we set targets? So that's in the no plan, do, tell. Where do you think it is? Plan, right? So you have to plan. When you plan, you set the strategy, and now you have your baseline. You have your goals. This is what we want to achieve, longer term, shorter term. Now you have to set specific targets by indicator or by metrics. So I'm going to get Toby to talk about SBTI in a minute. This is how questions can develop more deeper understanding, right? So I'm going to get Toby to talk about SBTI in a minute, science-based targets, which is a very structured way of setting your climate targets. Above and beyond that, set the target. What I would encourage SMEs to do, this related also to the cost question later on. When you identify your material matters or the areas that are important to you, look at those areas and the metrics that you're measuring and try and see what level of tolerance each of the metrics have. For example, as I mentioned earlier, forced labor, almost no tolerance, right? So your target needs to be whatever that compliance level needs to be and beyond. So instead of minimum wage, maybe look at living wage as a target or a goal, for example, right? So, so in terms of setting target, look at the areas, your material matters that are important. Look at where you stand, very important, run peer benchmarking. A lot, maybe not so much for SMEs, but a lot, look at the listed companies as well, not just locally, globally. See where the market stands. That's almost the minimum of where you need to set your target. And you almost need to be a little bit beyond that if you want to be competitive. So as much as you can, peer benchmarking, industry benchmarking. Sometimes if you don't have specific companies, ideally it's company name, you might be able to see some statistics from an industry level from all the research papers, etc. Toby, if you can talk about SBTI.
Very simple one, right? Once you start calculating your emissions, you know what your baseline is. And often you also then not only say my baseline is 500, right? But it's 500 or it's X per ton of product, or per, for Jennifer, ton kilometer, or per ton of palm oil, right? So you say, what is the CO2 per ton of product that I sell? And then the most rigorous way to look at the target is this SBTI, Science-Based Target Initiative, that says by 2050, we need to be at zero, right? So they draw a path from today to 2050, and how quickly do we go to zero, right? And for every industry, they publish a detailed paper, right? If you're in transportation, it will show you how quickly does marine shipping come down, how quickly does road transport come down. They publish it for any kind of industry. So if you want to get a first idea, what is the likely trajectory, you will see it there. What might be even more important for the SME is, if your customer has committed to reduce their emissions, they will have also a commitment how quickly to reduce their scope 3 emissions, right? So they would have said, up to 2030, I reduce my scope 3 emissions by 20%. And then they will go to the SME. Listen, if in 2023 your emissions were 50 ton per ton of product, then by 2030 it can only be minus 20%. It must be 40, right? So if you look at the customer, he might already say, how quickly do the emissions need to come down?
Question, what happens if my revenue double up?
No, it's because, I mean, companies are still growing, right? That's why I say it is important to also look at it per ton of product or per kilometer, etc., right? And we did a project for a company that is still growing, right? But while they're growing, they're exchanging the boilers, putting solar panels. So while their revenue has increased by 30%, their greenhouse gas intensity per ton of product has come down by 20%, right? Because for the new plant, they're immediately already doing the right thing, from a greenhouse gas perspective, the right thing. So that's why it's important not only look at absolute emissions. If your company is growing, look at intensity per ton of product, or per metric, whatever it is. Is it kilometer, is it ton, is it liter, whatever. Okay, that answers the target setting, right?
Yep. Thank you. Thank you. Okay, it does come out. Okay, thank you. Excellent. So just to add on to that, the intensity metric is extremely important for emerging economies like us. So as companies begin and continue to grow, the intensity metric is so important, especially for the global south. So do keep that in mind. All right, so, sorry, the second question was cost. I'm going to quickly address that as well. So many SMEs will always, well, first let's get the incentive one out of the way. So in terms of incentives, you might have heard our central bank has the low carbon transition facility, which is it's a debt structure. It is it's a loan, but the interest rates are capped, right? And you can get that from most banks. Now, recently launched, and Tuan Said was here earlier, and I don't think he or his team are here. Oh, there she is, Amira. Do you want to quickly give a 30-second plug for DIAF?
Okay, hi everyone. My name is Nor Amira. I'm from the Malaysian Investment Development Authority. So on 24th April, very recently, we have launched a Domestic Investment Acceleration Fund. It's called, in short, DIAF, for ESG adoption. So the fund, we can provide it up until 500,000 per company, but it's a matching grant, 70-30 or 50-50, depending on case-to-case basis. So when you apply, you will require to register with MyDAO first. We have our guidelines. It covers software subscription for the first year, and also the cost for you to go for ESG compliance, verification or certification. But just to mention that we don't cover any training expenditures or any capacity building. Yeah, so you can contact me if you want to know more, or go to our website.
Excellent, so that's on the MyDAO website. So those are just a couple of highlights. I think earlier SME Corp had mentioned a couple as well. Sorry, I'm going to say, can you take it offline? Okay, so there was a question on why B Impact was selected. So that's going to be an offline question, if that's okay. All right, so let's do this. We're going to, so addressing the cost issue. So incentives aside, SMEs always ask us, or rather they have the preconception, sustainability is extremely expensive. Is that true? Yes is correct. No is also correct, right? So is sustainability expensive? Does sustainability cost money? I'm not here to tell you that it doesn't cost money. I'm not here to tell you that it's not a trade-off sometimes between different priorities in the organization. But you do remember EESG? So at the end of the day, when you are looking at, in terms of a business case, and I've always said, you know, that it comes down to business fundamentals. When you review any business case, if you're looking at implementing SAP in your organization, a back office ERP system, right? You have a business case. What is the capital cost? What is the ongoing maintenance cost? What is the ROI on that system? Similarly, for every sustainability initiative, I would encourage you to look at what the implications to the business. Remember, reducing risk? Reducing risk will have possibly costs with no ROI, but the ROI is your ability to continue to run a business. It's your license to operate. Your increasing profits will be hopefully some of the easiest to actually pull together a business case because it's very clear the financial returns on that. Unlocking growth is where you're going to become a little bit more strategic. Now you're going to put on your strategic consultant hat internally, and you're going to start analyzing what does this mean in 3 years, in 5 years, in terms of implicated, whether it's opportunity cost, whether it's the cost of not taking action today. So at the end of the day, the cost question is a very real one. I would say in your financial projection, use sustainability as a line item, look at the business case, and even if you have, let's say you have 60 initiatives that you want to invest in and you do 2 this year, keep a log of the ones that you're not doing. At some point it might come in relevant, and see what your appetite is as well. So it's not just in terms of what you are able to, but sometimes what you're willing to invest as well. And that goes back, yes, to business, but at the end of the day, sometimes it also goes back to the passion and commitment of the leader of the organization in an SME. Yeah, so thank you for that question. Any other questions? All right, if not, we're going to plug on ahead. I have about 15 minutes to run a very quick. Now, the good thing is that Navina covered some of this, so she saved us a little bit of time, so I'm not going to go through some of the basics. You saw the SEDG, and you saw the 15 topics. I'm going to quickly read through because we haven't done this yet today. Emissions, we've spoken about at length. Energy, water, waste, materials. Next week, the sector guides, there's going to be biodiversity, okay? Human rights and labor standards, employee management, DEI, occupational health and safety, which all of you, if you're in manufacturing, have already become experts in, hopefully. Community engagement. I could talk for hours, but I won't. Governance structure, policy commitments, risk management, very important, anti-corruption, customer privacy. Is the fintech person still in the room? So I'm just going to take examples of industries. Okay, fintech's not in the room. Because I'm going to say, okay, what do you think is your material matters? So obviously for them, environmental will be emissions. Fintech, customer privacy is huge, right? So that is a quick and dirty of materiality. As you look at the topics, as I'm reading through them, you're already putting on your industry hat or your company hat, and you're thinking, oh, that's important to me. That's not so important to me. You're already running a very rudimentary materiality assessment, right? All right. So, won't go through this in a lot of detail. It's aligned to all the global standards. We've got all these different tools available. Do check it out online. I was asked also in the break how to actually structure a sustainability report metrics disclosure. It's available in the guide as well. All right, so now we're going to do a very quick, Akilan, I'm sorry, but very quick review, 3 to 5 minute review of the environmental disclosures.
Thank you. It's okay. Hello, can you hear me? Cool. Hi, everyone. In case you missed it just now, my name is Akilan. I've been working with Tobias at Lasaju for a few years now as a consultant. So Marty's given me a very tight deadline to walk through all the disclosures in about 5 minutes. So I apologize in advance, but of course, please stop me and ask me questions at every single step. So I won't go through every single disclosure because then we'll be here until 7. So I'll only go through the basic ones in detail and then give you a flavor of what it looks like going from basic to intermediate to advanced. Okay, so the first topic, as you know, is emissions. And in basic, we keep it very simple. Only report scope 1 and scope 2 emissions. So if you remember what Toby said just now, what do you need for your scope 1 emissions? All of you have your fuel bills, how much oil you buy, how much waste you combust, whatever you use to generate electricity, you should have these bills and this activity data somewhere. So that's the point of the SEDG. We want disclosures that are relevant for the companies, for your customers, as well as information that you should have somewhere deep in your archives or with your accountant. You should just spend one day with them to get this data out. Let me pause there once. Is everyone okay with the scope 1 and 2 emissions? And would you be able to have this data within a month, 2 months? Yeah? Okay, I see nodding heads, which is a good sign. Okay, then let's move on to the second topic, which is energy. So you will realize that energy comes very tightly with emissions, right? How you calculate your scope 2 emissions, you get your electricity bills, your kilowatt hours that you consume. And that's the exact same thing that you would report here under scope 2, except you would also report the energy you consume from electricity, heating, cooling, steam, any form of energy that you purchase into your company. Again, you should have bills for all these somewhere. It's just a question of accumulating them for a year and calculating the total at the end. Again, I pause here. Everyone okay with this, with the energy disclosures for basic? Okay, no questions, huh? Yep, to Toby's point, just in case you didn't hear him, whenever it says if applicable, you don't necessarily need it unless you actually consume it.
So under cooling, is air conditioning counted?
Okay, good question. If you purchase that cooling from an external supplier, then yes, that comes under scope 2, right? But if you have an air conditioning facility and you use electricity to power it, then it's just your electricity consumption.
Very few of you buy cooled air. It's KLCC, it's Malaysian airports, they have a separate cooling plant next door. Ignore it, for SMEs ignore it.
Yes, you can ignore it. Steam, maybe you might purchase it. A lot of manufacturing companies purchase steam from external providers. So if you buy steam, then you will need to know how much steam you purchased. Okay, since I'm on a deadline, we'll go to water. So water, the basic disclosure is the water withdrawn from external sources. So for most of you, for mainly all SMEs in Malaysia, this will be the water that you purchase from your water provider. So from Ais Lango, for example, right? And you just report the amount of water that you buy. But, of course, if you're an agricultural SME or whatever, you withdraw from a river, then you would have to report that as well under surface water. And so these 4 categories below, surface water, groundwater, seawater, and if you produce water yourself, you report them under these categories. But, like Toby mentioned, these are if applicable, right? So if you only buy water from Ais Lango or whoever it is, you only have to report that. And again, you should have that in a bill somewhere in your company. Any questions? Yeah?
Hi, I'm Eric Tam here. What about the, what you call rainwater harvesting?
It's a very good question. It's actually a question that we get in every single workshop that we do for the SEDG. So rainwater, in theory, in GRI, is counted under surface water, right? You're withdrawing from surface water, but I would report it separately. As in, it's obviously, I think it's a general agreement that it's better to harvest rainwater and more sustainable than withdrawing from a river, for example. So I would report the rainwater harvesting in a little bracket separately. But that's why it's important to also keep in mind the context and report the context of the situation as well. Any other questions aside from that? I think we had one in the middle here.
Hi, Juicy. I'm just curious, right? Let's say if my company is providing services and my team actually can work out from shared office and all that, right? That means most of them in I place them in shared office, does it mean that I don't expose to others? Because I trying to figure out, because shared office shared by a lot of companies, right? Yeah. So how does it work?
That's a good question. When you say shared office, I'm assuming you're leasing, you don't own the office, right? Yeah, so then you wouldn't need to report that. Margie, do you?
Can I say it's a proportion? So ideally, if your landlord or your lease owner has the total, and then it's either proportioned by real estate space, by number of companies, number of floors, etc. If you can proportion what is being utilized. If they have individual metering, even better, but I doubt they do. Yeah.
Yeah, it's a bit different because, I mean, for emissions, for example, if you don't own it, then it comes under your scope 3, right? It's not in your scope 1 and 2 anymore. But for water, yeah, you would probably apportion it based on the percentage. Okay, then let's move on to waste. And for the waste, we would simply ask for the waste that you have generated. How much of that waste is diverted from disposal, so diverted from going into a landfill or being incinerated, and then how much of that, directed to disposal would be the incinerated and landfill, and then diverted from disposal would be how much you recycle, how much you reuse, how much is kept in circularity. And that actually, I'll cover the next topic as well, because that links very closely to the materials topic. Because we talk about circularity. Margie mentioned the case studies from just now about Deso, the carpet company, that recycle and reuse their waste carpets. She mentioned the tar company, I believe the road tar, that also had a circular model. So many companies are using these kind of circular models to reduce their consumption of raw materials and to decrease their waste and to increase their recycling. And that's been a very good business investment for them. So here we would ask for not only the waste, but also for the materials that they use to produce and package their main products, their primary products. So of course, if you have 100 products, it would be unreasonable to ask you to disclose the materials for every single one, right? But what we really want is your top 10 products by revenue, by amount you sell. You identify those, and you list out the main products and how much, main materials used and how much you use. Is that okay? Would that be doable? You should have it somewhere in your purchase materials and goods.
And again, it's about materiality, right? It's not about the pencil here, right, or an eraser there. But if you're a glass manufacturer and you buy tons and tons of sand, of silica sand, that's what you report, right? Because it depends. Can I buy silica sand or do I buy recycled glass colored, right? That's where this material and the waste comes in. Can I actually reduce my material use by using recycled material? And that is what you all will hear as circular economy. This is the leading indicators, the leading disclosures for circular economy.
Yep. Thanks, Toby. And that would be the 5 basic disclosures under the environmental section of the SCDG.
Thank you, Akilan. And thank you for the speedy run-through.
Yeah, you're welcome.
All right. So, sorry, you had one more.
Yeah, I was going to say.
That's what you're going to say, sorry.
I thought you were going to rush through it.
No.
Yeah, so just to give you a flavor of the advancement from basic to intermediate to advanced as well, we'll just show the example of emissions since Toby's gone into so much detail. So basic, like I said, scope 1 and 2 emissions. Done, easy, bole, right? And then intermediate is our favorite part of it because it's all about reduction. How much have you reduced on a year-to-year basis? And if you need to start from scratch, it's fine. You report your reduction in the next year and the next year and so on. But that's what we're really looking for at the intermediate stage, some action. And then finally, advanced, we go to the dreaded, scary scope 3 emissions. So for SMEs, of course, your customers' scope 3 emissions, like Toby mentioned, are your scope 1 and 2 emissions. So that's why we say, okay, we focus on your scope 1 and 2 emissions first, and then at the advanced stage, once you have your scope 1 and 2 emissions, then you look into your scope 3 emissions. But first, we would ask you to disclose it and then reduce it as well. Now over to you, Margie.
Thank you so much. So, just to highlight, and that's why, remember, you know, some people might challenge and say, you're only doing a box ticking exercise. Are we doing a box ticking exercise? Yes, we are. Is that all it is? No, it's not. So, as much as box ticking has come under intense heat, I do stand up for the fact that box ticking inculcates the right behavior if what you're ticking makes sense. So this is exactly where it comes into play, where if you're ticking the first boxes under basic, excellent, you know where you are. If you're ticking the boxes under the second category, you are now reducing. So yes, I'm box ticking, but I have to make the reduction before I can tick that box. So just keep in mind, every time somebody says, don't just do box ticking, keep in mind what boxes you're ticking as well, all right? So we're very, very supportive of the fact that this hopefully will inculcate behavior. Remember we were talking strategy earlier? Strategy, know where you are. Strategy, how do you reduce, right? Okay. Oh.
Sorry, I steal for one more second, yeah? So Toby will kill me if I don't mention the greenhouse gas protocol. We love the greenhouse gas protocol. The point is that there's a lot of information on how to calculate scope 1, scope 2, and yes, even scope 3 with detailed guidances. You see all these documents on the right. They're completely free, and it takes some time to go through all of them, but I would recommend, of course, to only look at the ones that are relevant for you at the moment. So don't go and read the hundreds and hundreds of documents all at once. Yeah, one by one step at a time. But it's all available, and it's all relatively easy to understand. Okay, I go away for real now. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you, Akilan. I should give you more time next time. All right, so not going to go through in a lot of detail. Let me just take a poll. I've got exactly 4 minutes left, which I can finish the disclosures. We cannot run the exercise. Do you have 10 more minutes for me? Okay, I tell you what, let's make it democratic. Whoever has 10 extra minutes, stay in the room. We're going to run a little exercise. You're going to get a takeaway. If you don't, you're free to leave at 4:30 because some people have, prior commitments, but try and stay. All right, very quickly, in the next 4 minutes, let's cover the indicators. So we're going to talk about, this is a few words simplifying a very complicated process. Report the number and nature of child labor and forced labor incidences. If you have good practices and policies in place, this is super easy. I'm not in violation, I am in violation, you know, right? If you don't have good standards and practices and policies in place, this becomes difficult. So first thing you need to know is identify what is the scope of incidences. What does that mean? What is an incident? What is a violation? Which you will find out next week in the release of the SEDG Forced Labor Guide, all right? So do look out for that, 30th May. So here it's about reporting the number. Next, every single one of you will be able to at least respond to one disclosure, right? Okay, there are a few more that you can respond to, but what I'm trying to highlight is also that a lot of the ESG disclosures are not difficult. They're basic things that you already have. So here, report the average hours of training per employee. Why? Because we want to track it every year. We want to make sure that you are in fact developing your employees. Next, report the percentage of companies' employees. We've only gone with gender and age at the moment. If you are able to disclose even more, even better. But again, another stat that you absolutely have. Report the number of fatalities and injuries. Your health and safety standards should be impeccable. If you're in manufacturing, you already have this indicator. Next, this is the only community engagement basic indicator, which is report the total amount of community investments and donations. We've not gone into the details of social impact measurement here, but if you're able to, do disclose impact measurement as well. You'll see later on in the advance is about assessing risk as well. Anyway, those are the basics for social. And again, remember the behavior, encouraging the behavior through the advancement from basic to intermediate. This is an example. So in the basic, know the number of incidences, report it. In the intermediate, what do we want you to do now? We want you to look at the risk. Even though I'm at 0, what is the risk of my operation being in violation? Which, as we have covered, consequences, huge, right? All right, quickly, everybody who is a registered company can do this. Report the number of directors in the company. List the company's policies, including but not limited to. We've gotten a lot of questions about why it's not more. It should be more, but we wanted to set the minimum standard at these 4 at the very least: code of conduct, anti-corruption, whistleblowing, health and safety. You can have a sustainability policy, if you can have energy use policy, fantastic. So the more you can add on, do ensure that that's included as well. Next, report the year of the last submitted audited financial report. If you're a registered company, should be very straightforward. You can even tell me right now. And finally, report the number and nature of confirmed incidences of corruption, okay? Which, if you have the right policies in place, you should also be able to report this relatively easily, okay? So, next, what are we going to do? Thank you. So the team's going to hand out a sheet of paper. What we're going to do, I promised you 10 minutes, is we're going to do very, very quickly. We're going to give you a sheet, and all it is, it's the 15 disclosures that we just described one by one, okay? And they're just in order to see where the room is at, and so that you kind of get a feel for choosing your disclosures, look at 15 disclosures, and have a look at, can you tick the ones that you already have data for? Number of directors, etc. I already have data for this. Tick, 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 tick. The ones that you can have data in 1 year, circle. I don't have it right now. Remember, Akilan was asking you, scope 1 and 2, can you have it in the next 1 to 2 months? Some of you nodded. Those, if you can have that data in 1 year, circle it. So I'll give you 5 minutes to do that. And what we're going to do, which is really fun because you get a feel for your peers in the room as well, we're just going to ask you how many ticks. I'm going to say less than 5, 5 to 10, and you're going to be able to see where the market generally is at. Okay, so tick the ones that you already have data, circle the ones that you can have data in the next 1 year. All right, clock is ticking. Excellent. Someone's finished over there. All right. Now today you're just ticking very quickly. This is a very rudimentary exercise, right? But you can take the sheet back with you, and as you go back, you know these are the 15. Try and finish all 15, let's say within a year, and then start looking at intermediate. All right, we good? Okay, we're going to quickly push ahead so that I can release you in 5 minutes. All right, so count your ticks, count your circles. Moment of truth. All right, I'm going to start with the ticks, yeah? How many in the room have less than 5 ticks? Less than 5 ticks, raise your hand. It's a safe space. We're not going to carry any stories outside of the room. Anybody with less than 5 ticks? All right, so everyone can get started on this guide. Anyone with less than 10 ticks? 10 ticks. Okay, so less than 10 ticks, roughly about 15% of you. All right, how many with 11 ticks? Oh, sorry, how many with 10? Let's do 10. 10 ticks. Excellent. 11? Perfect. 12. 13. Excellent. 14. Way to go. 15. Come on. Champions, 15. There we go. Okay, excellent. All right. Now we're going to do the ticks plus the circles. Okay? Ticks plus circles. So what you can do now, but also what you can do in a year. How many ticks plus circles? Less than 10. Less than 10. Okay, thank you. Okay, so 3. How many? 10. How many can do 10? Ticks and circles. All right. Okay, 11. Perfect. 12. Good. 13. 14. Perfect. 15. Woo! Okay, so maybe about 10% of you said you can do all of it within a year. Now, this is, again, we're starting with the basic disclosures. Note that it's not always linear, right? It doesn't mean that you do this 15, then you move on to intermediate. Remember materiality? If you pick your material topics, look across for that topic. Look at the basic, intermediate, and advanced for that particular topic. We just did down, we didn't go across, all right? So with that, that's just to kind of give everyone a feel that this is in fact incredibly doable, and I do encourage you to have a look, and then once you have those indicators checked off, look at the additional guidance. You can now start mapping it to the global standards that you might or might not want to look at. And with that, on behalf of CMM, TIG, and Lasaju, I truly thank you for staying to the end, which not everyone did. And with that, I wish you all the best in taking your actions in your companies. It's going to take every single one of us to address this global issue. Thank you very, very much.
Thank you very much, Margie, Toby, and also Akilan. Again, ladies and gentlemen, Toby, Margie, and Akilan. That, ladies and gentlemen, was the shortened version of our SDG adoption workshop. If you want to know more, if you want to know about the extended version, do look out for announcements on our LinkedIn page. Do follow us on LinkedIn, Capital Markets Malaysia, and we'll provide recent updates and also our workshops engagements in the future. Again, thank you so much for coming. Thank you so much for your time. I hope you have a great evening ahead. Thank you.